topic today is on health technology. I worked in healthcare, but not in the interface of health and technology per se. So when I chose this topic, I wanted to explore new areas, and that's why I chose something that's new to me. Can you go to the next slide, Chris? So uh, yeah, so when I was thinking about healthcare, the idea of the Internet of Things came to mind. And all of us own some kind of wearable device today, right? And it is not just these wearable devices, but there is a whole ecosystem of products and services that we use today that speak to each other, right? Could be in the form of hardware or software. And these can be used to routinely monitor various physiological and psychological markers, like sleep and psychological stress, heart rate, hydration, right? All those respiration, etc. And what is the benefit of these technologies from the consumer point of view, right? From the user point of view. And so one question that comes to mind is, do all these IoT devices and apps lead to better health outcomes? And that's a very important question to ask per se. But if you think about it, one of the problems is that unless you do a randomized controlled trial, if you just look at people who have bought these devices and look at their health outcomes, one challenge is that people who choose to buy probably already sold into those health outcomes, and that's why they're doing it. And there is clearly an issue of selection there, and that is something that needs to be considered. The second point is that even if consumers buy these devices, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence and some research that has documented that people probably don't even use these devices on a regular basis, right? They use it for a couple of months and then they put it in their closets and don't use it. So there's a lot of noise in the data, so which makes it really hard for us to infer exactly what is being used. And the more important question is, even if all these are met, even if you can figure out if why people buy and also whether they use it regularly, the question is, does monitoring of your health or your markers of health on a regular basis lead to a greater well-being? And when I was thinking about this, something that Vikas mentioned earlier resonated well with me, having worked with doctors and also looking at research in the healthcare domain. They look at more, they don't go into the theory of what happens and why it happens, but they mostly document. So some of the studies that have looked at the effect of wearable technology on well-being have documented that, oh, okay, when people use it, there is some benefit in some cases, and it works for older people. Why does it work? We don't know. Or there are also research that have documented that there could be some adverse effects of using these devices. For example, I found a very interesting paper that actually did a randomized controlled trial on a set of people who were trying to lose weight, and they gave a control group the regular treatment, and the treatment group, they gave these wearable devices. And what is fascinating is they found that people who had the wearable devices, they actually had experienced lower weight loss. And that comes to the question of why that does happen. And so, of course, these studies don't go into the theory of why these things happen. Maybe there is some scope for studying this. Chris, can you go to the next part of this? So this is all from the consumer point of view. And I think, as speakers have said earlier, there's a whole ecosystem, right? It's not just the consumer, but there are also these healthcare providers, there are payers, and there are drug manufacturers, etc., who kind of come into this whole ecosystem, and there is scope for studying some of those. So one thing that comes to mind is that these health monitoring devices not only potentially have benefits for patients, but they also have benefits for all these different stakeholders. And for one, they can reduce hospital readmission rates. It's been documented to some extent. And they can ensure adherence to medication. I think Poonam talked about this in her earlier. And another important thing is that can also lead to faster drug development. And why does it happen? Because if you look at traditional drug testing, some of these have to measure things at different time intervals, not on a continuous basis. But once you have these monitoring devices, you can monitor progress on a regular, continuous basis. Time flies when you speak. And I'll just take a minute to finish this off. And the question is, do the benefits of the technology outweigh the risks associated with privacy, right? Or you can think of it as conversely as do privacy regulations actually curtail some of the benefits? And can I take a minute more and go to the next slide?
Maybe 30 seconds, because we're really out of time.
Yeah. So another promise is the telemedicine, right? The telemedicine as during the COVID pandemic, we've had a lot of consumers using telemedicine, and that's actually a very nice intervention that we can study. And the telemedicine has the promise of reducing a lot of constraints that people face in healthcare in terms of wealth, access, etc. And we can study a lot of consequences of introducing a wider adoption of telemedicine on the ecosystem as well as patient well-being.